purpose of this bill is to give effect to some of the measures announced in the budget last week. Our twin objectives in this budget have been to ensure that those most in need of the support of the Department of Social Protection are protected the most, and that the Department does everything it can to get people back to work. That is why we are transforming the Department from being a mere provider of income support to an effective and engaged public employment service that assists people on the live register or otherwise far from the labour market to start their progression back to work, to training or to a job placement.
Minister, could I just interrupt you a moment? I'm going to call the Minister of State to make an announcement.
We extend the opening of the start of private members until the first round of spokespersons have spoken.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Continue, Minister.
Okay. That is why we will be providing 10,000 new places on employment schemes next year and opening many new transformed social welfare offices. Fianna Fáil's utter failure to introduce any meaningful reforms to the social welfare system to encourage work were highlighted today in the ESRI research on jobless households. Fianna Fáil's toxic legacy is writ large in every damning finding of the ESRI, not least the astonishing fact that between 2004 and 2007, at the height of the boom, the share of households defined as jobless recorded a double-digit increase to reach 15% of the total of households. The average across the Eurozone in 2007 was just below 10%. So during the 2004-07 period of economic expansion, Ireland was one of the few countries in the EU to experience an increase in the proportion of jobless households. This occurred despite Ireland recording the highest rate of employment growth in the EU over the previous decade. At the same time, the tendency of jobless households to be in poverty was reduced due to very significant increases in welfare rates. And that then, people will recall, that then Taoiseach Bertie Ahern and Minister Mary Harney and others in that government travelled the world inviting workers to come to Ireland to work. The only place the ministers in that government didn't visit was the local social welfare and FÁS office to get employment opportunities for people on the register in Ireland. This, in a nutshell, was Fianna Fáil's approach. There was no problem to which the solution was not to spend more money. So instead of introducing the kind of reforms that were brought into other European countries to change from passive to active welfare states, including job search assistance, education, training and skill development and work support, services like childcare, Fianna Fáil had no ambition whatsoever for people who found themselves unemployed or in jobless households. This government has greater ambition for those citizens who are unfortunate enough to be unemployed. It views each and every individual who's on the live register or otherwise distant from the labour market as a non-tapped resource and a future employee who will participate in the rebuilding of this country and its economic recovery. That ambition is why we are moving from a passive to an active welfare state. As deputies are all too well aware, Fianna Fáil's largesse in everything that the state has been spending means that the state has been spending far in excess of its revenues for several years, but cannot continue to do so indefinitely. Deficits have to be financed through borrowing, I think currently at about 46 million a day, but there is no queue of lenders willing to lend to Ireland in the quantities needed or at anything approaching a reasonable rate of interest. Even when Ireland returns fully to the markets, deficits will add to the stock of debt owed by the state, and an increasing level of debt will increase the interest we must pay now and into the future, and so reduce the amount of money available for public services and productive investment. In 2012, the deficit will be over 13 billion, equivalent to more than 8% of GDP. With the single exception of Spain, which has a similar level of deficit but a lower stock of debt, no other EU state is adding to its debt more quickly than Ireland, despite the enormous efforts that have been made by people in Ireland so far. Discussions are continuing in relation to the promissory notes and other aspects of the banking debts imposed on the state by Fianna Fáil. I'm confident that a positive outcome will be achieved that will contribute to achieving these aims and reducing the burden on the taxpayer. This is the background against which the government has had to frame the budget of 2013. It's been necessary both to increase tax and other revenues and to reduce expenditure. Spending on social protection accounts for nearly 37% of current government spending, and given the background I've outlined, it is simply not possible to exclude social protection schemes and services from consideration when it comes to cutting back on expenditure, nor is it possible to exclude PRSI from consideration when it comes to raising badly needed revenue. I fully realise that nobody in this House would want to cut social welfare, and I certainly do not wish to cut child benefit, respite care grant, or the duration of the job seekers benefit. We are all aware of people who are struggling to make ends meet, to pay bills and to put food on their table. The social protection system is an expression of solidarity with those who are less well off than ourselves. It supports social cohesion, but it also sustains economic activity by maintaining incomes in times of recession. Securing the long-term viability of the social protection system is a vital goal that serves the interests of society as a whole, and not just those who directly benefit from social welfare payments. I've long been of the view that the burden of resolving the financial crisis should not fall disproportionately on those who are dependent on social welfare for their income, whether they are pensioners, parents, children, the unemployed, or people on a disability payment. People rely on social welfare as a safety net when they become parents, or when they retire, or when they become ill or injured. The unemployed rely on the social welfare system both as a safety net while they are unemployed, but also as a springboard to help them get back to work, education or training when they've been unlucky enough to lose their jobs. But I also believe that social protection spending acts as a very important stimulus, as the money we pay out is recycled back into the economy. People spend their social welfare payments on themselves and their families, and the money they spend here supports shops and other businesses in their communities. The Comprehensive Expenditure Review, published last year for the period 2012 to 2014, provided for a reduction of a further 540 million in expenditure by the Department of Social Protection in 2013 as its contribution to the reduction in current expenditure of 1.7 billion envisaged at that time. However, the Government has decided that the adjustment to social welfare spending will be 150 million less than previously agreed. This means that I'm introducing savings measures of 390 million next year, compared with the original figure of 540 million, which was announced this time last year. As I mentioned earlier, it is not possible to entirely avoid cuts in social protection this year. However, while social protection accounts for almost 37% of spending, it will account for less than a fifth of total savings in current expenditure in 2014. This has allowed me to again preserve the core weekly payment rates, while at the same time providing for the increasing numbers of pensioners who represent a real demographic bonus to Ireland. We have more older people and they're living longer, and that's something as a society we should celebrate. But it does cost in terms of the social welfare budget. While I understand the disquiet felt by those affected by the measures in this bill, it is also fair to point to the large numbers of social welfare recipients whose incomes are entirely unaffected by the budget because their payments have been preserved. For the second year in a row, there have been no across-the-board cuts in weekly payments, which is a considerable achievement. So compare this to the €16.30 per week cut which Fianna Fáil imposed on carers and people with a disability, as well as job seekers. People can continue to rely on their basic weekly payment, and this is essential so that they can have a sense of security regarding their income. Pensioners and all those under 66, such as people with disabilities and job seekers, will have their weekly payments fully maintained. As a result, spending on social protection will be again over €20 billion in 2013. And can I say, the Fianna Fáil National Programme for Recovery, their proposal for 2013 was a spend of €18.5 billion. That is additional cuts of a further €1.5 billion over what this particular government has unfortunately had to face. So I think you can understand, deputies, the high priority that the government continues to give to the area of social protection in these very difficult times for people relying on a social welfare income. The government's determination to protect the most vulnerable welfare recipients by maintaining the level of core rates of payments is strongly informed by the very significant contribution of social transfers to poverty reduction in Ireland. As you may be aware, official data shows that in the last year for which figures are available, the social transfers reduced income poverty by 60%, from 40% to 16%. If pensions are included, the impact on poverty reduction rises to 68%. As such, our social welfare system plays a vital role in minimising poverty, and that Ireland's performance on this score is the best in the European Union. This performance is rarely given adequate recognition in public debates about the impact of the economic crisis on the most vulnerable. In that regard, I want to acknowledge the support I received from the opposition last week when I presented a request for a supplementary estimate to the Dáil. While we differ on many issues, it is clear that there is support on all sides of the House for the social solidarity that spending on social protection represents. I'm also pleased to have secured €30 million in new spending on employment programmes and childcare places. This investment is consistent with this government's priority of getting people back to work or getting them back to education and training, so they will improve their chances of getting a job in the future. I hope that if this programme proves successful, it will be seen as a small but progressive first step on the road to building a social protection system that will ultimately provide our citizens with better services. Turning to the specific contents of the bill, it provides for the following changes arising from Budget 2013. Changes in relation to certain pay-related social insurance (PRSI) contributions, reductions in the maximum duration of job seekers' benefit, changes in the assessment of income from farming and fishing for means-tested social assistance payments, reduction in the monthly rate of child benefit, reduction in the respite care grant, abolition of the employer rebate in respect of statutory redundancy lump sum payments paid to employees, and facilitation of the recovery of a greater amount of overpayments through weekly deductions from social welfare payments. The bill also provides for a number of miscellaneous amendments to the Social Welfare Code, which arise mainly from a Budget 2012 measure to provide for a new structure of reduced rates in the case of contributory pension schemes. I propose to bring forward major reforms to pensions policy next year, following the publication of the OECD review of the whole pensions landscape in Ireland, which is due in April. As deputies will be aware, I have previously signalled concerns about the current rules for the distribution of assets in the wind-up of defined benefit pension schemes that are underfunded. Earlier this year, I commissioned a technical report to explore the possible options, and I expect to receive this shortly. This is a complex area and there are no easy options. However, it is clear to me that the current method of distribution of pension funds when a scheme is being wound up is inequitable. I have also been struck by the consensus among certain pension stakeholders on the need for change. As such, once I receive the technical report, I will bring proposals to Cabinet with a view to amending the current order of priority in the Social Welfare and Pensions Bill that I will introduce in the first half of next year. As I've said, cuts have to be made, and given the level of expenditure on child benefit, which is over €2 billion, or 10% of all expenditure, it has not been possible to avoid some reductions in child benefit in this budget. Despite the budget reductions, our child benefit rates remain high in international comparisons and are still above the rate that prevails in the UK and in the North, where the rate for the first child is around €110 per month, and where there is a lower rate for the second and subsequent child in a family at around €72 per month. Child benefit is a universal payment generally paid to mothers of all income levels. I am determined that any future reform of child benefit will preserve that principle of universality. And because this is a payment which affects so many women, and I've had an opportunity to talk to so many women, I know that most women favour the retention of a strong universal payment. In particular, it's worth bearing in mind this when we see that our nearest neighbour, a country that can print its own money and is not in hock to any troika, will remove child benefit in its entirety from families that might be considered middle income with effect from next year. And I have to ask, is this the system that Sinn Féin would like to emulate here? In line with commitments contained within the Programme for Government, I established an advisory group on tax and social welfare last year. The group has presented its report to me, and I intend to publish this in the new year. Following publication of the report, I will bring it to the Joint Oireachtas Committee so that there can be a full and informed public debate on the options regarding the future structure of child benefit, specifically with regard to means testing or other structural reforms. The Department will spend €775 million on carers in 2013. That is actually €5 million more than it's spending in total on carers this year. So I want to be very clear about that. There are no changes in the half-rate carers allowance scheme, which is highly valued by over 20,000 carers. However, the respite care grant will reduce from €1,700 per annum to €1,375 per annum. This will mean that the rate will still be ahead of the €1,200 which applied in 2006 when the Celtic Tiger economy was at its peak. Since coming to office, tackling fraud and improving control have been priorities for me. I am now introducing measures to enable the Department to recover overpayments quicker from those who have incurred them. At present, payments are frequently made at a level of €2 per week, which means in reality that some overpayment payments take years to repay, if indeed they are ever repaid. As well as providing savings, this measure will send a strong message that there is an obligation to return money owing to the Exchequer. There is an obligation on the citizen as well as the Department to ensure that only entitlements due are received and what is not due is returned for the benefit of others. The bill provides that up to 15% of the personal rate, that's the individual rate, can be withheld to repay an overpayment. I'm conscious that some overpayments occur because of departmental error. While all overpayments must be repaid, including those that arise because of the departmental error, it is not my intention that people will face hardship as a result of these new arrangements. The particular circumstance of each case will be considered before the repayment amount is determined. However, with regard to those who have been found guilty in court of having deliberately defrauded the taxpayer by abusing the social welfare system, I regard the 15% limit on deduction to be very reasonable in those circumstances. And this is the personal rate. It doesn't include dependents, it doesn't include children, it doesn't include child benefit. So if the personal rate for a job seeker is 188 and they were involved in frauding the social welfare system, up to now, we can only recover it at €2 a week, which many regard as a joke. We'll now be able to recover a modest amount, but we'll be able to recover an amount that will actually help us to recover the overpayment and act as a deterrence in relation to fraud. I want to inform the House that I will be tabling 3 amendments to the bill at committee stage. These will be in relation to counting Sunday as a day of employment for job seekers' payments, postponement of the implementation date of changes in respect of the one-parent family payment, and changes in the household budgeting scheme for local authority rents. In relation to job seekers, changes will provide that Sundays will be taken into account for the purposes of determining entitlement to the job seekers benefit and job seekers allowance scheme. Under the current legislative provisions, a person can in general qualify for job seekers benefit or job seekers allowance where he or she is unemployed for at least 3 days in any period of 6 consecutive days. However, Sundays are not counted for this purpose. This means that where a person works on a Sunday, this day is neither treated as a day of employment nor as a day of unemployment for qualification purposes. These current legislative provisions are based on the historical notion of a 6-day working week where Sunday is a day of rest. These changes bring the job seekers benefit and job seekers allowance scheme into greater alignment with the current operation of the labour market by counting Sundays in the determination of the entitlement to job seekers benefit and job seekers allowance. Only people who work on Sundays and claim a job seekers payment in respect of other days are affected by this measure. Under the one-parent family payment, changes will defer the dates on which age reductions from 12 to 7 years for entitlement purposes are to begin to apply from the beginning of January in 2013 and 2014 to the beginning of July in each of those years, and also extend the period over which the transitional arrangements for the continued payment of one-parent family payment are to apply from the end of December 2014 to the beginning of July 2015. This is to provide more time for the creation of additional childcare places, as I indicated last year when introducing the budget bill in December of 2011. The household budgeting facility, where a person can opt to have a specified amount of their social welfare payment deducted by impost and paid to certain utilities and to local authorities, will be extended by introducing new provisions specific to payments of rents to a housing body. Tenants of local authority accommodation who are in receipt of a social welfare payment may opt to have a portion of their social welfare payment paid to a local authority in respect of their rent. Local authorities will require tenants of local authority accommodation who are in receipt of social welfare payments to sign up to the household budgeting facility before being offered accommodation. Tenants will require the consent of the housing body before being allowed to withdraw from the arrangement, and such consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. Some of the savings achieved by these measures are being redirected to provide additional spending in the key areas of job supports and childcare supports. An additional 14 million will be allocated for after-school childcare places targeted at primary school children. The places are aimed at low-income families where parents are availing of an employment opportunity. This initiative is part of the Government's overall strategy to support parents in low-income families to take up employment and to solve the problem of the extraordinarily high number of jobless households that we have in this country. And a child in a jobless household is at major risk of being poor over the rest of their life. An additional 2 million will be allocated to expand the school meals programme, which aims to provide food to children, particularly the hot breakfast clubs that many members of the House will be familiar with. 2.5 million will be allocated to a new area-based approach to child poverty initiative, which has been worked on by Minister for Children Francis Fitzgerald, by the Taoiseach, and by I know many deputies in the House, to bring joined-up thinking to how a whole series of agencies interact in providing services to children and to families who may be in some difficulty in their particular area. I'm using some 11 million of the savings from the job seekers measure to make a major expansion of our employment and internship programmes as follows. An additional 2,500 places for job-rich internships are being provided in 2013. An additional 2,500 places are being made available for TUS in 2013. The Community Employment Scheme is to benefit from an additional 2,000 places in 2013, and a new local authority social employment scheme offering an initial 3,000 places will be introduced in 2013. These additional places on employment and internship schemes complement the childcare measures I referred to earlier. So overall expenditure on working age employment supports has been increased by 95 million to 1.05 billion in 2013. And just let me say, it is so important, with the department becoming an active department in helping people get back to work, that we have places to offer to people who for the most part are desperately anxious to get back into work, particularly people who've been out of the workforce for a long time. And many of these places can be used in conjunction with the very good initiatives which have been developed by my colleague Minister Quinn in relation to Springboard and Back to Education.
Tell the Minister there's 5 minutes remaining, Minister.
Now outline the main provisions of the bill, 3 parts and 14 sections. Part 1 contains preliminary and general provisions. Part 2 contains amendments to the Social Welfare Acts, a number of amendments to the contributory pension schemes arising from the Budget 2012 decision to provide for a new structure of the reduced rates of state pension contributory and state pension transition. Just in terms of the time, Section 5 reduces the amount of the annual respite care grant by €325 from 1,700 to 1,375. The new rate will apply to all claimants who qualify for the annual respite care grant, which is paid as a cash sum in June 2013 and in each subsequent year. Section 6 provides for the abolition of the weekly PRSI free allowance of 127 with effect from the 1st of January 2013. Section 7 increases the rate of assessment of self-employment income from farming and fishing from 85% to 100% in the case of farm assist, job seekers allowance, pre-retirement allowance and disability allowance schemes. In addition, it provides for the abolition of the annual child-related income disregards, and these changes will take effect from April 2013. Section 8 reduces the monthly rate of child benefit by €10 per child in respect of the first, second and third child. From January 2013, the monthly rate for each of the first 3 children will be €130 per month. Section 8 also provides for a reduction in the monthly rate of child benefit by €10 per child to €130 in respect of the 4th and each subsequent child from January of 2014. Section 10 provides for an increase in the minimum rates of the pay-related social insurance contribution paid by self-employed contributors with effect from January 2013, going up from €253 to €500. Similarly, in respect of voluntary contributions as set out in Section 11. In relation to job seekers' benefit, Section 12 reduces the duration of job seekers' benefit from 12 months to 9 months in the case of people who have paid at least 260 PRSI contributions, and from 9 months to 6 months in the case of people who have paid less than 260 contributions, with effect from April 2013. And this change will apply to new claimants. Section 13 sets out the recovery of overpayments to provide, as I mentioned earlier, a deduction of up to 15% of a liable person's relevant personal weekly rate of social welfare payment. A person will not be entitled to compensate for any overpayment deduction from their primary social welfare payment by seeking an additional payment of supplementary welfare allowance. Increases payable in respect of a dependent adult or child, or indeed child benefit, are not affected. Section 14 amends the Redundancy Payments Act of 1967 by abolishing the rebate paid to employers in respect of statutory redundancy lump sums paid to their employees. Rebates will continue to be available to employers on or after the 1st of January 2013 on statutory lump sum payments made to employees who have been made redundant before the 1st of January 2012 at a rate of 60%, and on or after the 1st of January 2011, but before the 1st of January 2013 at a rate of 15%. This completes the main provisions of the bill, and since I became Minister for Social Protection, I've been very conscious of how crucial our social welfare expenditure has been in protecting the most vulnerable and minimising poverty during the economic crisis. And the remarkable poverty reduction impact of welfare in Ireland has greatly underpinned social cohesion, in contrast to other countries affected by the economic crisis, where we have seen quite an amount of violence on the streets. I'm very conscious of the impact on family living standards from high unemployment, falling incomes and over-indebtedness. And I just want to say, focusing on people returning to work, providing the extra 10,000 places, the extra childcare places, every time somebody returns to work. And happily, this November, 11,000 more people went back to work than in November of 2011, and 7,000 more than went back to work in November of 2010. Every time somebody goes back to work, the Exchequer gains to the tune of up to 20,000. And that really, along with securing the Social Insurance Fund, is the way we protect the social welfare structure that we have in Ireland, while making it responsive to help people get back into a job, or to use Obama's phrase, to become job ready. And that's the purpose of this social welfare bill and all of the reforms we have undertaken since we've come into government. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.